Welcome to the Real Bible Rob podcast once again. And today I'm going to talk about a really fascinating subject, and that is about Celtic Christianity and how it relates to indigenous faiths of all kinds, and how this one indigenous faith in Ireland and Scotland really can help us identify with indigenous faiths of other kinds as well. I'll start by doing a little bit of history. What is Celtic Christianity? And where that leads and why it's important, and then how that relates to our understanding of indigenous faiths, especially Christianity. How can Christianity be accepted by indigenous people given the horrible history that Christianity has placed on that? And then kind of go through, well, once we understand the indigenous faith better, it really gives us an opportunity for reconciliation and for building faith together. I'm part of a community called the Community of Aidan and Hilda, which is a dispersed Celtic Christianity group. People of numerous different Christian denominations participate in this. It's kind of a loosely organized. It's started in the UK in the 80s, and it now is in the United States and several other countries. And have some information about that as well. I also have a long list of, not a long list, but a pretty long list of publications in here that you can do it and or they can look at, plus a website for a Celtic Christianity bookseller. Uh, don't worry, I don't get any commissions or not really promoting anything. I'm really more interested in just what Celtic Christianity can do for us and help us to understand better who we are and who we're with. So let's get started with some history here. So we're all very familiar with the name of St. Patrick. And St. Patrick was a saint who was born in, at least as the legend goes. He's a very legendary figure. We don't have much in the way of fact about him. But he was born in Ireland and then went to Europe, became a Christian, a priest, and a missionary. Went back to Ireland uh, under a lot of risk. He was, you know, he wasn't received friendly, and there were, but he went back and basically began the Christian church in Ireland. There are lots of legends about him, casting out the snakes from Ireland and things like that. And we have songs about Patrick. We have lots of stories about Patrick. But because this was in the 6th century, that this is so early on that we really just don't know very much. Another figure from that period uh, in the 6th century, uh, late 5th, early 6th century, is Brigid, Saint Brigid, and she's out of Kildare, which is about an hour or so drive to the southwest of Dublin. And Kildare's a really cool community. There's a great cathedral there, dedicated to Brigid. Nice little town, and there's a well there, and lots of Celtic things happened there. And the thing about Bridget is she was uh, a really interesting figure in that she also of legend had radical, although they call it said reckless. Um, Generosity to the poor, to people. In fact, her father said, "I don't deserve you," because she kept giving away his possessions and selling them and giving them to the poor. So, and Bridget is also this legendary figure in that um, she's kind of a bridge between the Druidic pagan past and Christianity. She's was a figure of legend for the Druids and for that community, also for Christianity, and she also it kind of there's an exhibit about how the Celts thought about time. They didn't think about time in this really linear Western way that we do. it meant nothing to them. They could think to have centuries of difference between different stories about Bridget. In fact, one story is that Bridget was the midwife to Mary to give birth to Jesus, and that she pops up somehow and helps with him. Many other stories about Bridget, but she's a cool figure because being a woman in you know in a monastery as a basically an abbess of that period, uh, and that she is so pivotal and such an important figure in early Christianity in Ireland and the Celtic Christianity that ended up spreading throughout the British Isles. Uh, so when we talk about the Celts too, we're also talking about a people group, an ethnic group. um, the Celts have a long history, thousands of years, mostly in Western, or I should say, Western Northern Asia Minor. You've heard of the Galatians. The Galatians were a Celtic type people, descended from them. There were Celts throughout Germany, France, what is Germany and France today, northern Spain. And then as the centuries went on, these groups gradually got pushed aside. Uh, uh, Julius Caesar fought the Celts in France and fought the Franks, the Gauls. And these people were pushed aside. And as time went on, they moved further and further to the fringes of Europe. So today, the Celtic areas that we think of are in northern Spain and in Galicia, and then also in far western France and uh, Ireland, Scotland, and these places, and gradually got pushed aside, basically by the Saxons and the Normans and other groups of people. But they adopted when they were in Ireland, before a lot of these invasions, especially the invasions of the Normans, the Vikings, the Irish had adopted Christianity, as we know from St. Patrick, and Christianity was very strong there. So Celtic Christianity was a big deal. We don't know if Christianity was really in England. There's a lot of ideas that there was Christianity in England and Scotland before, but clearly it had either died out or wasn't there to begin with. And the Irish went to England and Scotland to Christianize them in the seventh century, in the fifth century and seventh century. Saint Aidan went and created the community on Lindisfarne, which is the Holy Island. And you can even go there today. It's a cool place. You have to kind of drive out at the right time because there's a little causeway that gets flooded by the tides every 12 hours. So you have to kind of go out and go to the Holy Island, they call it, which is in very northern England, almost at the Scottish border in Northumbria. The community there is called the Northumbria Community of Christians. One of uh, the founder of the community of Aidan and Hilda, which I'm a part of, which I'm a Voyager, avowed Voyager of, was started by um, a priest named Ray Simpson. And Ray Simpson started the community of Aidan and Hilda and really brought a lot of the revival. He and a few other people really brought the revival of Celtic Christianity, especially in the 1980s, that lives today. And he's based on Lindisfarne and and the Northumbria community there. Uh, so when this happened, Saint Aidan started Lindisfarne and began a succession of um, monks that uh, gathered on Lindisfarne. Uh, Saint Columba started a community on the Isle of Iona around the same time, and this is on the other side of the island. It's over in Scotland, and you can visit that today. This place is very important to me personally because I was on the Isle of Iona uh, several years ago, and this is where I received my call to ministry. The abbey is there. There's a cloister. There's some ruins there that come from the 10th and 11th century that are still there. The abbey is a little bit later, but very, very old. And it's a great place of pilgrimage. A lot of young people go there. In fact, what kind of convinced me that this was the new direction, that God had tapped me on the shoulder for ministry, was to see young people, teenagers from all over the British Isles and the United States go there on pilgrimage and do services at the Abbey on Iona. And what a great place! And there are lots of stories about Columba there and the community that grew up there. A lot of this then led to, okay, here's Celtic Christianity kind of flourishing, both, for a long time in Ireland, then came to England and Scotland and was really flourishing there. At around in the middle of the 7th century, though, the Roman Catholics were also around too. And they became, unlike the time when Patrick was there, Roman Catholicism wasn't as well organized in Patrick's time. But by the time we reached the 7th century, the papacy was well established, the canon had been pretty much settled, the Roman Church was very strong and started spreading all over Europe. And they'd reached England. And there was conflict between the more what we would call indigenous people there, uh, and who had adopted Christianity, and the Romans coming in. Now, the Romans were there, during the Roman Empire too, but these were not Christians, of course. Christians came somewhat later, and they kind of came back. There was conflict between them, and in 664, there was a Synod of Whitby um, in the Abbey of Whitby, uh, and the abbess there was named Hilda, Saint Hilda. Uh, the disagreements were over what we would consider probably today really minor um, doctrinal issues, but that's the way it usually happens. Is that these kind of schisms, these difficulties usually happen over minor things, maybe theologically, but they're kind of an indication of deeper divisions. We certainly see that today, is that most of the things that people fight over uh, doctrinally are not really the things that they're worried about, and it was very much true then too. The two things that really stuck out for them was, one, it was the tonsure. Tonsure is the how you shave your head. If you were a Roman Catholic, you shave. If you were a monk, you shaved a bald spot on the top of your head, and this was a symbol of devotion to God by exposing the top of the head. I guess that has some sort of belief about exposing who you are to God and not hiding who you are to God. Um, and both communities, the Celtic community and the Roman Catholic community, the monks had the tonsure. But the Celtic community, instead of having a bald spot on the top of the head or the back of the head, they had one where they shaved the front part of their head. So they had sort of the bald spot from their forehead up. That was a big deal to them. I don't know why it matters at all, but that was a point of division. Now you could tell who was a Celt and who was a Roman Catholic by the way they did their tonsure. The other big fight was over the date of Easter. Now, the Roman Catholic calendar has Easter kind of like we do today, that we still celebrate in the Western Church, Protestant churches and Roman Catholic Church, and that is where we have Easter as the first Sunday after the first full moon of the spring equinox. Really kind of a complicated formula. Lots of history of where that comes from and why that is, but the Celts didn't have that. They didn't have that complicated formula. They had Easter based on the calendar itself, on the lunar calendar. I think there were concerns about the Celtic calendar being close to like the Druidic calendar, The pagan calendar. Maybe they wanted to reject that. Who knows? But those were the two big things that they fought over. So here's Saint Hilda, and a powerful woman figure again in Celtic Christianity. Celtic Christianity had more of these strong women figures than the Roman Church did. That may have been a point of division as well. Anyway, she presided over the Synod of Whitby, and she accepted, and she said, and, and told the Celts that they should accept whatever the outcome is. And in fact, they agreed. If the Celts won the vote, then they would go with the Celtic Church. If the Roman Catholics won, then they would all conform to the Catholic way of doing things. Well, by a very small margin, the Catholics won, and this was to the great distress of Hilda. And you can imagine the pastoral work that she had to do with that community to keep them faithful through losing that major battle. But essentially, the indigenous form of Christianity in the British Isles lost the Synod of Whitby in 664. There were other people that were a bit more upset by this. One of them was St. Coleman, left the community in the Lindisfarne, Whitby area, went over to Iona. Even that wasn't far enough away. And then he took a whole bunch of monks with him, both Irish and Scots monks, over to Ireland, settled in the County Mayo in the west of Ireland, and then went to Inishbofin, which is even further to the west. Inishbofin is an island off the coast of Ireland. And there was division even within his own community, because the Scots uh, Christians, Celtic Christians, tended to be a lot more industrious, tend to be a lot more push harder, right? Whereas the Irish ones were a lot more laid back, and were a lot more accepting of being laid back. You can almost see that a little bit in Scotch and Irish cultures today. There's definitely difference in attitude about that, and it goes all the way back to that time. So uh, that's where they are. But and so you go, well, why is this so important? And why do we talk about these saints? Why do we study about them in this era? Almost everything we know about these early times in British Christian history comes from the author Bede, Bede. And, um, uh, the idea of history is a little bit different for these folks. So you don't know exactly what's legend, what's not legend, but we rely on Bede's works a lot in our understanding of this. But the thing that's most important by far is just that there was diversity in Christianity. We have been told, a lot of us in Western Christianity, that there wasn't much diversity in Christianity, and that's just not true. An author named Darmaid McCulloch wrote a book called Christianity: The First 3,000 Years. He's a great scholar. He's, I think, out of Oxford, and and he did a TV series on this and the whole thing. BBC TV series, definitely worth watching. The thing that he talks about is that there's Christianities. And the one thing that I got from reading his book was that the prominence of the Syriac church in Syria and the Levant, in that area, in these early centuries, that the church had made it to Western China. There's a lot of church stuff, a lot of Christianity in Western China in those early years. Throughout most of what we would call the Muslim world today was Christian. Of course, we all know about the Ethiopian church. We know about the Coptic church, with both of those still exist today. There is a Syrian church, but it's been oppressed pretty hard. But there are Christians in Lebanon and in Syria, around Aleppo, especially. Of course, we know about the Armenians and the Christianity there. Christianity in Western China and in India pretty much has died out or was taken over by Muslims in that time. But and then there, of course, there was the African church. We know about Saint Augustine and many others that were in northern Africa. So this idea of a singular Christianity is just propaganda, more or less. When the Roman Catholic Church consolidated around the idea of apostolic succession, meaning that starting with Peter being the first pope and popes beyond that, they developed this idea of apostolic succession. They give some lip service to the idea that there are Syriac churches and Ethiopians and Copts and others, but no, the true church is in Rome, right? When the Great Schism happened in 1054, when the Eastern Church left the Western Church and created the Eastern Orthodox Church, they can even rationalize it that way and say, well, that was Paul's church, the Eastern Church, and we're still the true church because we're based on the rock of Peter. um, you have to understand it was always much more complex than this. Even in the book of Acts and Paul's letters, you can see all the diversity of Christianity. There's always been Christianities. It's never one. As hard as the imperial church tried to make it one. So that leads us to why is it important to know about Celtic Christianity? Well, Celtic Christianity was, and it's well documented, a completely independent of the Roman Church. And even though you could say, well, St. Patrick, he was Catholic, right? Well, what does Catholic mean in that early? But as far as the Roman Church having papal authority in Rome, they didn't do it, and they only agreed to it. Most of them agreed to it. The Synod of Whitby. So you go that. So in a way, this is the indigenous people, the Celts, who were pushed out into the British Isles, especially out into Ireland and the fringes, and they had their own Christianity that they adopted that was a little bit different than the Augustine-based, Catholic Church. They're friendlier to Pelagius, for example, and Pelagius is almost like a dirty word in the Catholic Church or in a lot of Protestant churches. They're much more fluid about and accepting of some of their historic beliefs in terms of some of their pagan beliefs. Again, suppressed hard, pushed back hard, but they are just different, and they were different. So it's important to understand that they had a faith, a Christianity that was different. So, what's important here is to kind of understand if we know more about them and the Christianity that has been retained in the British Isles, then we kind of can get an idea of what an indigenous type Christianity for us, for white Europeans like me, and for many Christians, especially in the West, are white Europeans. Uh, how do people like me in these mostly white churches? How can we understand other kinds of Christians? Christians who are, indigenous Christians in America or in other parts of the world. How do we understand the Black church better? How do we understand the Asian churches better? How do we understand the church in Africa and the Middle East and so forth? One way to do that is to have a touchstone, a way to identify with. So that's why I think it's important for us to then we can be more gracious, be more ecumenical, and understand each other better if we understand Celtic Christianity better. So I think that's why it's important. It's also kind of cool if you have Scotch-Irish history, I don't, but a lot of people in the community do, so they can identify with their heritage, their personal heritage, and understand that and understand a Christian context. And these are beautiful places. These are places that are so soulful. The way of Celtic prayer is so amazing. In fact, there's a great book that introduced me to the Celtic way of praying, called by Esther de Wall, and it references in the notes here. It's called The Celtic Way of Prayer: Recovery of the Religious Imagination, and it's a great way to pray in that Celtic way that's very rhythmic and very Trinitarian, in a way that uh, you don't see as much in the Christian churches later, but has been adopted. There are a lot of Protestants now that, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, and uh, Anglicans, other kinds of Protestants really love Celtic tradition and have adopted some of these prayers. And that comes from people like Esther de Wall. Probably the best book, I think, for me personally, to be introduced to Celtic Christianity, if this is something you're interested in doing, is somebody that I've met and I know. And his name is Kenneth McIntosh. He's a UCC pastor in New York nowadays, was based in Arizona for a long time. And his book is called Water from an Ancient Well: Celtic Spirituality for a Modern Life. And it's wonderful. Explains a lot of a lot of these historical touch points that I've talked about. Um, he's kind of a successor a little bit. Ray Simpson is still very active, still writes a lot, involved in the community, and he wrote one of the seminal books, one of the books that really introduced this to a great audience, and that is The Celtic Christianity: Deep Roots for a Modern Faith. And you can see that in both of these, even in the titles, they're not backward looking as much as it is how can we take some of these old ideas and make a really great, faithful Christianity today? How do we get around the hundreds of years of colonialism and of domineering imperial faith? I mean, the imperial faith in the Catholic Church is 1,500 years old. Uh, it was like you either believe like we do or you're a heretic and, you need to be burned attitude, right? And then the Protestants kind of did the same thing. We became very intolerant of other faiths or any kind of differences. In our confessions, there have been attempts to unify and compromise, get a little bit bigger. You believe it or not, Presbyterians don't like to hear this, but the Westminster Confession of Faith is very much a compromise to bring Anglicans and Presbyterians and other Reformed people together. There were attempts there, but they're hard lines. It just says this is what Christianity is, and if you believe anything else, you're out. So the Celts have, and their Christianity allow you to kind of explore those boundaries a little bit. And that's what these books are really great for. So let's talk about Indigenous faith a little bit more. One of my professors in seminary was Randy Woodley, and um, I took several classes from him and spoke with him quite a bit. Randy is Native American, Cherokee, comes from Oklahoma, was is an ordained pastor, really evangelical for much of his life, did that work. And when he talks from a really deep well of feeling, as a Native American person. And he said, and he even says, why would any Indigenous person ever be a Christian? How can you be a Christian uh, as an Indigenous person after what the Christians have done to you and your community? Uh, in America, in the United States, boarding schools, reservations, genocide, just out and out genocide, burning villages and then stealing all of the children, sending them to boarding schools. That stuff happened all over the place. It happened up until the 1960s and 70s. It's a horrific history that we as Americans have not dealt with. We haven't had truth and reconciliation about Native, the treatment of Indigenous people in the United States. In Canada, their history is as bad or even a little worse. It was terrible the way they were treated. Even my own denomination, we had a lot of missionaries, we had a lot of boarding schools. Even in the 60s, my denomination is only now repenting of the way that we treated the Tlingits who are the tribes in Southeast Alaska, in my own presbytery, uh, where we just treated not only treated people wrong in terms of boarding schools and separations and genocide, but even into the 60s and 70s when we shut down the presbytery that my presbytery became part of in Alaska, shut down native churches, just saying your church doesn't matter anymore. And they were literally separating white people from native people in order to just, I don't know, you know, racism, right? We have a horrible history. It's similar in Australia. It's a little different, however, in New Zealand. One of the people in our community lived in New Zealand for 26 years, quite familiar with Maori culture, uh, has been back in the States for a decade or so. And she talks about how the Treaty of Waitangi, which is, very early in uh, colonialism of New Zealand, and how the Maori worked with their white lords, basically. Uh, and I asked her recently about the haka being done in New Zealand Parliament. I go, what was that all about? And she explained that since the Treaty of Waitangi, there has always been a place, and haka is one of these things where people can see eye to eye and they must be in each other's spaces in order to discuss, and that there has to be dialogue. And that's what we're seeing. And that some of the recent things that were happening in the New Zealand Parliament about nullifying some aspects of the Waitangi Treaty um, are deeply, deeply offensive to the Maori, completely unnecessary. Why are they doing this, right? So that's why the young parliamentarian stood up and did the haka in Parliament. Highly unusual. She did it because there needed to be a space to talk. And that's what that's about. So here's an example of an indigenous culture that's pushing back. In the United States, we didn't have that. So much of, in the Northwest, one of the things in Pacific Northwest where I am, there's this myth that when Lewis and Clark came in and, when people started settling in the Willamette Valley in Oregon and came to Washington State, how, uh, well, the lands were empty. It was open land. Well, the reason why it was open land is because there was a 98% death rate from the plagues that came through, smallpox plagues. Believe it or not, malaria was a big deal. So these people were wiped out before they came here. So it's kind of easy to have this attitude like, oh, well, we get along with Native people, or we honor Native people. They became part of our place names, in the Northwest. Well, it's easy to do that when they're not there and they're not strong. And they're not strong because they had died mostly. And they were easily put down. It was easy to steal their land in the Northwest. Of course, in other parts of the country, there's differing histories. It was harder to put down the Cherokees because they had become immune to diseases. They'd had exposure to Europeans for longer than the Northwest Indians did. So you look at this and you go, oh my goodness, well then how do we ever understand each other? And as Randy Woodley said, how can you be a Christian with that kind of a history if you're a native person, if you're an indigenous person? Well, that's something that he covers in his book called Shalom and the Community of Creation and Indigenous Vision. Is that the shalom, a Jewish word, right? This peacefulness, this peaceableness. Uh, Indigenous Christians see Jesus as their guy, in much in the way that uh, Black Americans, African Americans, have seen Jesus becoming their guy. Moses is their guy, right? Because he led his people out of slavery to the promised land. Jesus is their guy because he fights for the oppressed. Is uh, he's he's the savior, right? So they see Jesus, those who have not been completely rejecting, they see Jesus as something beyond Christianity, something beyond the imperialism and the colonialism and the brutal treatment, the genocide of Christianity toward them. And isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing how you can adopt a faith, the faith of your oppressor, and see it in a different way? And in a way, you can say that. So, if you look at it that way, there's a way for us to understand each other and develop that. Celtic Christianity is one of the ways that you can do that because if you identify, it's easier for a lot of Christians to identify with the Irish and the Scots Irish, especially given a lot of the heritage and customs that we have, than it is for us to identify immediately with Indigenous peoples in our own countries. But if we can empathize with them and we can understand how the Irish were treated with genocide by their overlords, all the way from the 7th century, but especially just even in the last 2 centuries. The Irish famine uh, did not have to happen. That was absolutely genocide. These people were prevented from getting aid. Uh, and that the troubles in Northern Ireland, uh, the oppression of the Catholics is just horrific, and it looks and it's this colonialist superiority thing, and you think, oh my goodness, well, I mean, if you're English, then and these people are practically the same as you. They're the same racially. They're Christians already, and you still treat them with oppression and genocide. So if you can see that, you can identify with them and identify with the toxic imperial attitudes that are behind it, then you can see a Christianity beyond the toxic imperial attitudes, much in the way that many Black Christians do today, and much in the way that Native uh, Christians do in Native spirituality. Most natives or most Indigenous people have a deep well of appreciation for the Indigenous spirituality that has been here for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. There's a book by Robin Wall Kimmerer called Braiding Sweetgrass that's also just a great book to read. It kind of gives you a sense of that, sort of the idea of um, being one with nature, seeing the Great Spirit, seeing spirituality in everything in a way that uh, most people who really know this, especially Indigenous people, see no conflict between the Jesus of Christianity, of Indigenous Christianity, and the historic uh, faith of the Indigenous people before Christianity came to the Americas. They uh, there's no conflict there. You can integrate faith together in a way that's very enriching and very beautiful. Something that we can really learn from. So we need to listen to this. To me, this provides a way forward because we all have to decolonize our Christianity. There are a lot of people holding on with every fiber of their being to that old Christianity that the that we are so familiar with, that most of us in America called, evangelical Christianity. But it's not just evangelicals, it's also, there are mainline people that just cling so hard to historic Western Christianity and are not open to anything else. So if we can understand better, if we can realize that the way forward is not clinging to that, and the way forward is to develop a new Christianity that doesn't have white imperialism built into it, that doesn't have the dominating cultures built into it, but instead sees Jesus beyond those things, beyond those barriers to faith. That's where this can be really, really valuable. So if you find this valuable as I do, I found this very life giving in my spiritual life. Is to see, you know what, we do have to change, and this is one of the ways, one of many ways, in which we can recognize the many Christianities that there are. This is one of the ways in which we can use our faith to be the brethren of people of other faiths, be the brethren of the people who have an indigenous faith and understand and be in communion with indigenous people as well. This is that shalom that Randy Woodley's talking about, that indigenous vision, seeing Christianity in that way. And that's really something super valuable. Like I said, uh, uh, Celtic Christianity is one of those ways. So if you'd like to discover more, please look at the list there. Look at the website, the Aidan and Hilda website. There's a lot more there. You can welcome you to contact me. Um, I have introduced a number of people to Celtic Christianity and connected them with our group as well. Yeah, I'm not really looking to grow the group necessarily, but of course, everybody's welcome. We really want to have an ecumenical group of Christians that are curious and exploring this kind of Christianity and looking at it a little bit different way. So with that, I'll say what I always do, and that is uh, people say lots of things about the Bible, especially when it comes to Western Christianity and the singular kind of Christianity that aren't really there. And with that, I say, God bless.